Welcome to Tampa Home Talk with your host, native Tampa real estate girl, Katrina Madewell, a full-time, passionate, out-of-the-box thinker, love for home ownership kind of realtor with over 21 years of combined mortgage and real estate experience. Tune in every week at this time for expert advice on everything you need to know about home ownership, finance, maintaining great credit, building wealth, and making your everyday life better, and how you can be financially successful today and tomorrow. Remember, love where you live or let Katrina fix it. Now, here's your host of Tampa Home Talk, Katrina Madewell.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to Tampa Home Talk this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited, as always, every single week to bring you a great show with a fantastic guest, and we try to make things relevant for in and around things that we see in the real estate space and also things that fit within the mission of our show, which is to help you keep and maintain great credit, live within your means, and build wealth. And my team and I are passionate about it. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. Very proud to have him in studio. He is not only one of our show partners and an endorsed provider with Tampa Home Talk, but he does an excellent job. He's been in his industry for 20 years. He's got a contractor background to go with it. But I want to introduce David Sivitz with On the Level Home Inspections.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. So one of the questions we got this week, and I thought who perfect to answer it than you, because you see this stuff, right? And among many others.
I see it all.
Yes. We actually got a call this week and had some people asking us detailed questions about Chinese drywall. And it's something that when homes were built around the peak of the market in 06, we experienced a shortage of building materials. And so some of this drywall was imported from China, and here we are finding out several years later that some of this drywall was toxic and it was imported from China. And I don't think they even know what the long-term health issues are yet, correct?
I don't believe they do.
I don't think they do either.
There wasn't that much of it, but it's a real problem when you find it.
Right. It's enough of a problem if you have it. So, so one of the questions we got too is we'll talk about some of the things like how to spot some things and try to determine if your house might have it, if you suspect that it does, or you heard about it, or you have questions, or something's not right. And then we'll also talk about some of the things that you see, David, like if you've done a home inspection and you noticed some things that are telltale signs that there may be Chinese drywall. We'll tell you how we can find out exactly, specifically, and then we'll get into some other home inspection tips and tricks and things towards the end of the show.
Great.
But really, so one of the things, let's talk about some of the things that you see that are a sign that you might have Chinese drywall. And when you and I were talking about this earlier, it made so much sense, the first one, but this is a clue, and this probably would prompt someone to listen to the show or further investigate this.
Well, I'm told that some people notice an odor of sulfur or kind of rotten eggs. Unfortunately, some people are very sensitive to odors, other people aren't, and we have a lot of water in this part of Florida that's got sulfur in it. So a house that's been sitting for a period of time, you first turn on the water and it smells. So that's not a very good indicator.
So it could have a similar smell.
It could have a similar smell.
The interesting thing, too, is I have been in a home that has Chinese drywall, and it was disclosed on the realtor information and otherwise, hey, this is a REO property, meaning a bank-owned property. They're reselling it. It has Chinese drywall, and it does have that. And one of the things I noticed for me is I almost got like a headache right away. It was and I don't know if that everyone experiences that, but I kind of felt like, stuff was off, like pressure and that kind of stuff. But you were saying earlier, the neighbors.
Well, if one house in the neighborhood's got it, chances are it's not the only one. 2006 seems to have been the year when it happened most often. So if the house was built in 2005, it's kind of iffy. And by 2007 or 8, it had been discovered that there was a problem and they stopped using it. But it can happen, of course, it can be anywhere. It could sit in a warehouse. It could have gotten used in 2007.
Right.
You never know.
But 06, I think, was the year they imported it, right? Yeah. Was what they discovered later. So what are some of the things that you see from a home inspector standpoint that would cause you to go, whoa, we probably need to reevaluate this and look for Chinese drywall? Or maybe you say, yeah, there's Chinese drywall here. What are some of the first things that you would notice or see as an inspector?
Well, something in the Chinese drywall reacts with copper. So you've got copper piping in a lot of houses, although not so many in 2006. But the air conditioning coolant lines, which run from the outdoor unit to the indoor unit, are copper. And I've seen them even just exposed in the garage where they're black. And there's no question that they're black as night, and that is an indication that there's Chinese drywall.
So one of the big things is copper, like the copper turning black?
Yes.
And so in the places they would find copper is behind the electrical panel?
Well, sure. Without opening anything, though, you often can see those. If you've got the air handler for the air conditioner in the garage or in the house in a closet, you may see it without having to open anything.
That makes
sense. But
the
easiest way to follow up on that is to take an outlet plate off and take a flashlight and look at the bare copper ground wire.
And so describe for the layperson listening like me, what is a bare copper ground wire?
Well, there are 3 wires going to the outlet at least. One's black, one's white, and one has no outer covering. It's bare copper, which is copper colored. And it may be bright and shiny, but often not. They oxidize from normal exposure to the air, and they'll turn a bronze color. That's normal. When there's Chinese drywall, the copper conductor, the wire is black, and that's a clear indication that there's a problem.
That makes sense. Do they use copper anymore for like plumbing and that kind of stuff, or not so much anymore?
Not so much. It's expensive. It's labor intensive, and they've changed mostly to what's called CPVC, which is an ivory color plastic pipe that has glued on fittings. It's much quicker to use. They also, the newest thing is called PEX. It's a clear or almost a clear plastic tubing, flexible, that they use, but copper.
Doesn't that one always get called down on the home inspection report?
No, that's polybutylene.
Oh, okay.
That's yeah. Well, they say that PEX is not going to split and crack like polybutylene, but it hasn't been out there long enough.
I didn't think they'd like the flexi stuff because stuff can get clogged. That's what I thought I read or saw somewhere, but.
Well, again, it's a labor thing. It's you don't have to use fittings to turn corners, and it's quicker to install. It's easier to connect than copper with soldering a connection is a problem.
Something that doesn't move.
Right.
So what other signs would you might notice as a homeowner that you could possibly have Chinese drywall?
Well, you can go up in the attic and look at the backside of the drywall. The garage is a good place because most garages don't have insulation, and products that were made in the United States have most of the time a manufacturer's time and date stamp on them. On the end of the board where they were joined together for shipping, there's a paper tape that often says U.S. gypsum or national gypsum. That's
one of the American manufacturers for drywall.
Exactly. You can't guarantee that you'll see anything, and that doesn't mean you have Chinese drywall. And you go through the rest of the house, you're probably going to have to move some insulation to see. The problem is with that is there's no guarantee that because one area has American-made drywall that you won't find Chinese drywall in another room.
Right.
There's nothing's to say that what was put on the truck was all from the same source.
Yeah. You know? And didn't you tell me that the Chinese drywall that came in didn't have any markings on the back of the drywall?
I've not seen any. No.
Okay.
There may have been something on the paper ends, but those are often torn off during installation. So.
Right, which would make sense. So I know one of the things I wanted to talk about too, because this comes up a lot, is the remediation process to actually take care of drywall. But before we move into that, how do you as a home inspector actually test to see if there's Chinese drywall?
Unfortunately, there isn't an on-site test that I'm aware of. So what we do is cut samples, about 2-inch squares, out of the wall, put them in a plastic bag, and send them off to the lab where they do an analysis. And they sit in a enclosed container for almost a week, and if there's Chinese drywall, whatever off gases will identify it. So I'm told that there's no gray area. If it shows up positive, there's no question that it's Chinese drywall.
It's like you're pregnant. It either is or it isn't.
That's right. There's no halfway.
There's no in between. So what's the cost to do that?
They charge, the lab fee alone is $200 per sample.
Okay.
And again, how many samples you take is up to you, but one sample may or may not tell you anything. Suppose you get the one piece that's made in North Carolina and the rest of the house is Chinese drywall.
Right.
So I guess...
Or vice versa.
Right.
Yeah, all of it North Carolina and one piece from China.
Well, so do you take 2 or 3? I would imagine so, at least, throughout the house. And it takes 7 days turnaround time. So you have to allow, if you're under time pressure under a real estate contract, to have inspections completed. This has to be done promptly.
And that's business days, right? Yeah. I'm sure 7 business days. Yeah. So you're looking at 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And as a home inspector, just to be clear, because I want the person listening to understand that when you go in to inspect the seller's home, because at that point, it's still their home. Like the buyer has made an offer to purchase it. And within that contract is a provision for them to do their due diligence and just make sure that it's sound. And if any defects you find, because you're going to find some defects, are things that people can live with. Yes. And so one of the things that you're not allowed to do, and us as agents have to make sure that you don't do, it's not like if you were to go in and do an inspection and then you open the electrical panel or whatever, you see black copper wiring somewhere. And it's not like you can just start cutting chunks out of the drywall because the house belongs to the seller.
No, not a good idea. No.
So I just want to be clear about that. So, normally what would happen in that particular instance is the buyer, a lot of times, if it were me, I would cancel, but it's obviously up to the buyer just until you have a chance to do further time period. Because like you mentioned, you have 10 days a lot of times to get an inspection on the contract, and that's A to Z. So you figure it might take a couple days or more just to schedule with the home inspector because everybody's busy now. Then maybe a day for the report. And then any additional inspections that you want to have, like if you want to have an electrician or a plumber, or let's say there's concern of Chinese drywall, you have to essentially allow for time for that, which is why 7 business additional days for lab work on drywall doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. But there's nothing you can do. If we see what we think are preliminary signs of Chinese drywall, like the corroded copper, the buyer, it's up to the buyer, of course, but they may have to ask for an extension on the time period for their inspections.
Right.
Or they have to go find another house.
And then a lot of times it would be, how much the seller want to sell, and are they willing to sell to this buyer enough to start taking chunks of the drywall out? Because it's is it like a 1x1 or 2x2 inch?
2x2.
Okay.
Yeah. But if this buyer found it, the next buyer's
Correct.
home inspector is very hopefully likely to find it as well. It's not going to go away, so they might as well get it resolved.
Right. But my point is, what I'm thinking is, as the buyer, I don't know if I would want to pay the extra $200 for a house that has Chinese drywall. It's not even mine. That's the seller's problem because he still owns it.
And it's not going to be $200. It's going to be about $750 or more when you get done with the my fee for taking and sending off the samples plus the lab fees. It's not inexpensive. I've only had to do it once, and that wasn't even on one of my home inspections. Somebody else flagged the house and suspected it, and the buyer and seller agreed to have it tested.
It's interesting that, and then I guess you boil down to who wants to pay for that. Sometimes they may split it, and extend the inspection time on the contract and that kind of stuff.
Well, in that case, the seller...
You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. We're going to take a real quick break, David. Hold that thought really quick because I'm going to let you finish as soon as we come back. And then we're also going to get into the remediation piece. So hold your thought. Back in just a minute.
You're buying a house. Congratulations. So while you're worrying about the paperwork, leave the moving part to us. We're Woody & Sons Moving Company, a Florida licensed and insured mover, and we offer same-day written estimates. Plus, no sneaky mileage, stairs, or additional stop fees. All we ask is that you check out our great ratings on Google and Angie's List, then go to woodyandsons.com to learn more. Whether you need a full service pack and move or some extra hands, at Woody & Sons Moving Company, we move you.
I have to get a home inspection. Katrina, do you have any idea who I should call?
We have the best. Our show partner actually is David Sivitz with On the Level Inspections. He's got 20 years experience and more than 10,000 inspections.
I am so happy. I had nowhere to go to.
All right, we'll line it up.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Aaron Davis, owner of Hillsborough Title. Hillsborough Title is a local, family-owned title agency here in Tampa Bay. Our service, strength, and knowledge make us different. We've served Tampa Bay area for over 30 years. From Polk County to the Gulf, Pasco to Manatee, Tampa Bay, we've got you covered. Call us at 813-712-8888 or visit us on the web at thebesttitle.com. That's thebesttitle.com.
Welcome back. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. Thank you so much for rejoining us today. In studio, we have David Sivitz with On the Level Inspections. And sorry to cut you off. We had to take a really quick break, but please finish your thought about the seller. We were talking about Chinese drywall in the earlier segment and what happens if you find it, how the buyer can't just go cutting chunks of drywall out, and then the buyer and seller possibly splitting the cost, and you started to say something.
Well, in that case, the one I mentioned, the seller actually paid for the lab test because they needed to prove, and they were correct, that there was no Chinese drywall. But in any event, they could split it, but the seller has, if this buyer found it, then another buyer is going to find it.
It's their house.
They're going to have to do something. So, yeah.
So how many samples did that seller end up sending, just out of curiosity?
We just did 2.
Okay. How did you determine which drywall to take those samples from?
I took them out of a closet so that whoever got to repair the damage wouldn't have to do it in the middle of an occupied room.
That makes sense. I was just curious, like if you would take that sample from somewhere near where the black copper wire was.
No, because I never found any evidence. I do not know what triggered this investigation on that particular home. It wasn't my home inspection.
Right,
so.
Which could have another whole part of it. So let's talk about, since you have a construction background too, and you are a general contractor, and you were educating me that there's 3 different types, but you're familiar with that construction background. What does it take to actually remediate, meaning eliminate, get rid of the Chinese drywall if a home is found to have it?
Well, first, obviously, all the drywall has to go out, has to be taken out, which means the cabinets, the flooring, the...
Now, are the cabinets ruined or just the drywall behind it?
No, but
okay.
You have to get them off the wall to remove the drywall behind them. The insulation in the ceiling and the walls, depending on what type of home there is, but there's some sort of insulation in the wall. Pretty much you're stripping the house back to bare studs or bare block. And now,
why would you remove the insulation too?
Well, because the insulation is, if the drywall is off-gassing whatever this is, it's gotten into the insulation, so you're not going to cover it right back up and have it still trapped in the house. Plus, the ceiling insulation in many homes is blown in fiberglass or cellulose, and you can vacuum it out, I suppose, and reuse it. But typically, you just pull down the drywall and let it fall, and then clean it up later. So.
And it's a gas, I think, isn't it, right? The Chinese drywall or gives off a gas or something like that?
I'm sure that's what it is, yeah.
So you're taking everything out, all the drywall everywhere, which means you're going to see the studs or whatever's behind the wall.
And fortunately, in 2006, they weren't using too much copper piping anymore. Sometimes just the little stub out for the shower head or the bathtub spout might be, but the rest of it was plastic piping, which is fine. But I did see some shower valves that were corroded or were blackened from whatever this is in the Chinese drywall. So you won't probably have a huge plumbing problem. The issue is the electric copper wire. There's a debate. There's no definitive answer on whether it has to be replaced or not. Now, the only parts of the copper that are exposed are those bare ground wires. There's no way to cut them back and splice them. Mm-hmm. And the little ends of the wire that have been stripped to attach to the outlets or switches. Now, those could be clipped off and stripped back with new insulation removed and then have fresh copper, but the ground wire is still... So really, you're rebuilding the house. Except for the exterior structure and the roof structure, you're starting over.
Does it get into anything in the foundation?
I don't think so. I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard that either. So, and it's interesting that it's a debate whether or not to replace the copper. And I'm curious if you have an opinion or a thought on this even, or if you know for sure, because you said that the Chinese drywall turns the copper black. And I wonder if that's just the outside exposure to it, if it can be scrubbed, or I guess that's the great debate, right?
Exactly. No, obviously, the electrician's first answer is,
yes,
we're going to replace it. and they're probably right, because the amount of labor involved in re-stripping all those wires and doing something trying to clean the exposed ground wire, time-wise, it may work out to be just as inexpensive or expensive to replace the entire.
Well, it makes sense to me, too. I mean, if you're thinking about it, you're taking everything out, and it can affect the appliances, too, by the way. So the refrigerator.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because they have copper in the back of them.
Dishwasher,
and that kind of stuff.
refrigerator.
Yeah, so all your appliances.
Washer, dryer.
So you're taking all those things out. You're taking the cabinets out. You're taking the drywall out. You're taking everything out.
Why wouldn't you
Yeah,
just do
you're down
the
to bare
electric,
bones.
right?
It makes sense to replace everything. At least I would if you were down to that point.
And the other thing that we haven't talked about is the air conditioning, heating and cooling. Now, the ductwork itself probably doesn't have any exposed metal or copper in it, but I don't know how much of whatever this element is gets trapped in the ductwork. But the cooling coils in the air handler are copper, and so that's going to have to be replaced.
Now, is that in the handler or the outside unit?
Well, there are coils in both, but we're going to figure the ones outside didn't get exposed to it. So the ones, however...
Now, is that something you can see or no, where those are at?
You can
see
open
those?
the air handler and you can see them. Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend you do that as a homeowner unless you know how to do that. But
worse than that now, since if you have to replace the coils on the inside, you're pretty much going to have to replace the entire system because they have changed the gas, the Freon gas, and it's not compatible with the old system. So
now some builders I know did an excellent job as far as going back in and honoring their structural warranty. And, you know, I had, for example, there was a property I had sold in New Tampa. And, you know, it was one of those neighborhoods where a lot of stuff was built at the peak of the market. So there was a ton of stuff that was empty, and there just was. So, you know, no rhyme or reason. You buy a bank-owned property, there's no disclosure. So you have no idea why the prior seller didn't do it. All you can do is look online, see if anybody put anything on Zillow or one of those other sites. And, you know, you buy this property, the home inspection looks good, everything looks good, you don't see anything. And then I talked to this client later, and he says, yeah, by the way, I noticed, and they came in and did tests, but the neighbors on both sides and across the street all had Chinese drywall. And they tested his house and said that there was they didn't find any Chinese drywall. And so they asked, and they gave him the option, which was surprising, but they said, you know, we'll come in and replace everything for you if you want, just as a precaution, since all the houses around you did. Or we can leave it, you know, it's up to you. And so he called me, like, what would you do? And I go, well, you're a single guy. It's not like you have to move a family out or anything. Why not? They're going to replace all your appliances.
Don't take
They're going
the
to
chance.
replace your AC unit. Yeah, you're going to replace everything. Because that would fall into structural, right? After 10 years, it's not there anymore, would you say?
Well,
Construction defects?
To me, structural is, you know, the structure of the house is going to fall down on you, and the rest of it is
Construction defects.
construction defects. So
Which I think most builders are 10 years. It depends on the builder, of course.
the problem is, if the builder is a big corporation, they can have the wherewithal to pay for that, or they have insurance or something to protect them. But the smaller local builders, and there are thousands of them, I mean, best intentions, they can't.
They didn't know any more than anybody did.
And they can't afford just to
Take
their
everything
insurance chances are is not going to cover it.
That's the other thing we didn't talk about too, that the fact that we're seeing homeowners insurance is not paying for that.
Right, they are not.
And so the builder's policy, like you mentioned, probably wouldn't pay for it either.
I don't know much about builders' policies,
That's
but I
such
don't.
a good question for insurance.
If they did pay for it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that the house is ruined and there's nobody to pay for it.
Right. I guess that's where probably some of the lawsuits would come into play, and, you know, maybe builder's risk or liability or whatever would surface itself at that time.
I mean, to me, this is one of those perfect instances where if the insurance company is not liable, that where the government ought to step in and protect the citizens by saying, okay, it was no one's fault, but we're going to help you out.
And that's the problem. It's another country that we imported the drywall from, one in which we owe a lot of money, but that's another whole topic for another day. And, you know, they don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to assume any liability.
No. And you know, that's fine. They can, but somebody needs to protect the homeowners here.
So worst case scenario, in that scenario, because the government didn't do it and homeowners is not paying it, the builder's either let's say they're gone, out of business, for whatever reason, they're not going to do it either. and here you're stuck with this house that has Chinese drywall. What would the out-of-pocket cost be for someone trying to do that? And I know this is a loaded question, David, so I'm not holding you to anything. But if you had to give a range for like a 2,000 square foot home, if you had to strip this property all the way down to the studs, replace the copper wiring, replace all the appliances, replace the AC, all the stuff we've talked about, what do you think a range in cost would be for that?
$50,000 to $80,000.
Right. Obviously, depending on your contractor and what you have there.
What can be salvaged and what quality finishes were there. And if the whole house is tiled, you're in good shape. You don't have to replace the flooring. If it had carpet, then you're going to have to replace the carpet.
That's right, because it gets in the carpet too.
I don't know whether you would if you had laminate flooring or hardwood, whether it would be necessary. You can probably just clean it and be safe. But
it's so many unknowns still with this. Like, there's not enough information to really, for a lot of people, like long-term health risks and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And when you're thinking about, renovating a house like that, you have to factor in the cost of demolition. All that old stuff has to be removed, disposed of. And
I imagine hazmat has protocol for that because it's toxic, right? I mean, I'm sure they got a say in it.
I'm sure they do.
So there's so many layers to this topic of conversation. So the other question that I know we get to, because I just saw it come up on one of the Facebook pages that I frequent, and someone else was saying, I'm buying this property from an investor, and there was Chinese drywall, but they've rehabbed it. They've remediated all the Chinese drywall. And so that's an interesting thing because you didn't get to see what was there before. So how does somebody like you actually re-inspect or know if it's been remediated properly?
Well, we don't have any idea what they actually did. I guess this is a perfect example of you're going to take some random drywall samples and send them to the lab and make sure that you don't find any more. And again, we can look at the visible signs of oxidized copper, but otherwise, you don't know what they've done.
So knowing what you know, David, and let's just say, and the answer for you might be you may or may not even buy it, but let's say there's a house an investor selling. They've rehabbed all the Chinese drywall, and you want to buy this house. You like the location. It's next to your children or whatever. For whatever reason, you want to buy this house. And this investor has remediated it and rehabbed and taken all the Chinese drywall. What would you look for? Like, what kind of things would you look at first?
Well, I'd like to see a new electric panel. I would expect to see a new air handler and probably a whole new air conditioning system. I would probably insist upon actually taking drywall samples and sending them off to the lab. And probably open every outlet and switch box from the room side and look at the copper wire in there to see if there's any hint that there's anything left.
I was thinking receipts too and specs. Like if you go to get a construction perm loan, everything has to be broken down in detail. And it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to ask for some of those things if you were a buyer.
You can try it, but I mean, an unscrupulous seller could produce the same receipts for 5 houses.
That's
How do
right.
you know?
That makes sense. Total point taken.
Mm-hmm.
So one sheet of drywall, you said it was like, what, $10 just to give an idea?
Roughly. Yeah.
And then check the plugs. Was that something you think the homeowner could do safely, or should they call somebody still to do that?
You take the plastic cover off the outlet and just don't touch anything. Just take a flashlight and look inside the box. And you should see something that resembles shiny copper or at least a bronze-colored copper. If you can't see it in that box, move on to another one. And most of them you'll see. Sometimes it's just out of the way where you can't get a good shot at it. But
makes total sense to me.
Perfectly safe. You don't take the cover off the electric panel. Don't touch anything. Don't stick anything in the box, including your fingers.
Turn everything off too, right?
Well, you could do that. You could run out and just turn off the main circuit breaker in the garage, and then you'd be perfectly safe.
That's what I would do.
Okay.
Err on the side of caution.
Good idea. Yeah.
You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. We have to take a really quick break. To reach us on our off-air numbers, you can call or text 813-777-1196. Again, our off-air number here for Tampa Home Talk is 813-777-1196. 813-777-1196. When we come back in a moment, we're going to talk about some of the frequently asked questions you get as a home inspector in general when it's not related to Chinese drywall. We'll be back in just a minute.
I have to get a home inspection. Katrina, do you have any idea who I should call?
We have the best. Our show partner actually is David Sivitz with On the Level Inspections. He's got 20 years experience in more than 10,000 inspections.
I am so happy. I had nowhere to go to.
All right, we'll line it up.
Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Aaron Davis, owner of Hillsborough Title. Hillsborough Title is a local family-owned title agency here in Tampa Bay. Our service, strength, and knowledge make us different. We've served Tampa Bay area for over 30 years. From Polk County to the Gulf, Pasco to Manatee, Tampa Bay, we've got you covered. Call us at 813-712-8888 or visit us on the web at thebesttitle.com. That's thebesttitle.com.
Welcome back. This is your host, Katrina Madewell, and you're listening to Tampa Home Talk. Thank you so much for rejoining us. If you missed the earlier part of today's show with David Sivitz with On the Level Inspections, we were talking all about Chinese drywall, a question that we got this week and we've gotten in the past, so I thought it would make a fantastic topic for this week since we had you in studio. And I promised that we would also talk about some of the frequently asked questions and things you see in general as a home inspector. Now, if you missed any part of today's show and perhaps you wanted to hear more about the Chinese drywall that we were talking about, or you've caught another piece of a different show and you want to check it out, just go on over to our website at tampahometalk.com and you can see all of our past shows there. We're also available on a podcast. So whether you're an iPhone user or a Droid user, just go to any podcast player and search for Tampa Home Talk and we'll pop right up. So some of the things that like the main question you get when someone asks about home inspections, what's your number one question?
The number one question is always sinkholes, because everyone's concerned. There's a lot of sinkhole activity in this part of Florida, and there's a lot of people who don't know what to look for.
And you do a lot of stuff in Hernando and Pasco, which typically get a little more than some other parts of maybe Hillsborough County.
Yes. Hernando County is notorious. And
relocations, right? You get it from a lot of relocation buyers?
Well, I get it from everybody. Everybody's concerned. That's all they hear. And unfortunately, all they see in Hernando County are concrete trucks parked along the side of the street. So.
Well, it's funny, and I shouldn't say it's funny because it's really not, but in the Hernando MLS, when we look in there, it actually says sinkhole, yes or no, repaired, yes or no. And it's so odd, like looking from the Tampa MLS, because we don't have that.
Well, that's everyone's concern, and it's unfortunately not something that there's a definitive answer to. All I can see is what is on the outside of the house. I can see unusual looking settlement cracking, but most block houses, which a great majority of houses in Florida are going to have settlement cracks, normal settlement cracks.
Any house really in Florida is going to have a crack.
That's true. The garage floor is what scares everybody. You look at the garage floors, this giant expanse of concrete, and there's a million cracks. And I try to calm people and explain to them that concrete shrinks as it cures. When it shrinks, it cracks. So if you pulled up the flooring in the house, you'd probably see the same kinds of cracks. Not a concern. The types of cracks that are a concern are...
Let me ask you a question really quick just on that topic. And I'm not a contractor, but I'm just going to speculate and you tell me if I'm way off. So talking about the garage floor, those are always like one solid piece of concrete. Hypothetically speaking, if they were to break that up or put the stress cracks in them, kind of like they do the sidewalk, you probably would see less cracks in the garage. Is my thinking correct in that?
The whole point of those relief joints is to have them crack along those lines. They're either saw cut into the concrete after it's poured, or they sometimes put an expansion strip in there, and you're exactly right. That's the place for it to relieve the stress and not shatter everywhere.
Not bad for a girl dragon without a construction background.
And if you look at the driveways, the ones that have control joints leaving pieces that are about 10 foot by 10 foot don't seem to crack anywhere else.
Control joints meaning the lines, right?
Some place where it can give.
Gotcha.
Right. But the ones without will crack all over the place.
I just wanted to ask about that because I thought it was just a thought in my head, and I don't know why they don't add those, but they don't. I guess it's not code. I don't know.
Money.
Okay. So going back to what you said, one of the things that you look for that would propose, and again, you don't diagnose sinkholes. You can just say, hey, yes, this probably should be further evaluated by a structural engineer, or hey, it looks kind of pretty conducive from stuff I would see from one house to the next.
Cracks that go stair step like up the mortar joints in the block are normal unless they're wide enough to stick like a nickel into the crack. The ones that are of concern are cracks that run straight up the wall, and particularly if there's a similar crack on the other side of the house relatively in the same position. And any crack that runs up the wall that's wider at the top than it is at the bottom is a concern.
And straight through block,
And
really.
straight through the block, because that shows that the foundation has moved enough that the whole wall is starting to split.
And just because you see it on the outside with the block doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see it on the inside.
No, because the drywall will cover most of it on the inside, and the drywall is attached to a 3/4 inch strip of wood. So the drywall is not
It's going to give.
directly attached to the block, and it may move behind it without ever cracking the drywall.
So this crack straight through block. I know there's other things too, right? Like the windows.
Well,
Isn't
if
that
it's
something to
bad
look
enough
at?
that doors and windows aren't opening properly, then you really have a concern. Then it's pretty well given that there's some movement, unusual movement. But the cracks are what scare people. And the other thing, over the years, they have reduced the size of, in the building code, reduced the size of the overhang at the eaves to remove a lip where wind could get underneath it in a hurricane and blow the roof off. Well, all that does is drop the rainwater off the roof closer to the foundation, causing normal settlement, which leads to more cracks. Not a problem, just another reason for cracking.
And this is like washout. Like you don't see gutters and the side of the house starts to literally, the dirt underneath the house starts to wash away.
Well, no, it just gets compacted from the rain hitting it, and that's enough to cause it to settle, and then the whole house settles down a little bit and cracks.
And so the one thing I want to tag on about this, because I was born and raised here in Tampa, I've lived here my whole life. So the one thing I just want to tag on and say is it doesn't matter where you live, you're going to have something. So in here, that's one of the things we deal with. You know, it would be no different than living in California and you have to deal with unexpected earthquakes that would definitely probably crack your house.
Right. Or Hawaii and lava flows from a volcano.
Lava.
Right.
You could live up the Mississippi Tornado Alley and experience tornadoes out of the blue and those kind of things. At least with cracking, most of the time it's subtle, right? It's things that are going to happen over time. At least with the show that I did with the Florida geologist and the structural engineer, that was how they explained it. And that's on our podcast too, by the way. So you just look for Tampa Home Talk and you can look for that podcast.
Most of the true sinkhole settlement happens over time, but every now and then you come home and all you see is the roof of the house. Uh-oh.
Right. I guess it's possible. But I mean, for example, the geologists and stuff that I talked to that were in studio with me that day said that they sometimes the homeowner is saying no, but there's always something somewhere that maybe they didn't pay attention to or whatever, but there was some cracking or something that led up to that. So, and the other thing you see too is, like, what else do you see all the time? I know we see the garage, like the bottom of the garage door, the side door where the wood is.
Yeah, the three most common things in the last year or two are the side garage door and the door frame get moisture damage because they never really get opened and left open long enough to dry out. And the other thing are ground fault outlets with the ones that you see in kitchens and bathrooms that are there to protect you in wet locations. They're often defective from age, from lightning strikes, power surges, who knows. They go bad. And they have a test button on them, which no one ever tests until I get there. And for some reason, most recently in 2014, the most common thing was garbage disposals that had been removed and the live wires left dangling under the sink. I don't know what started that.
And so these three things we mentioned, they're really not expensive fixes.
No, but the most important things to me on a home inspection are things that are safety. Ground fault outlets, the electric wires under the sink. I don't care about the side garage door. I care about smoke detectors.
Which the lender does sometimes because of a type of termite that can attract to that. But
right, but that's not a safety thing. That's a financial thing they're looking at.
So let's talk about each of those things since you see them all the time and how simplistic and approximately what it would cost to fix that. So the wood on the outside of the garage or the side garage door, most of the time I've seen those repaired where they just literally cut the wood, they put in a new piece, they patch it, they paint it, and it's good.
If you catch it early enough, that's certainly, you can even go, if you get it earlier than that, you can just dig out the rotted part and putty it and paint it and be done. But yes, you can cut off the bottom 6 inches of the door frame and put a piece in, and that'll take care of it.
And so that would be a range in price of what? From a simple fix to replacing the whole frame would be about how much?
Well, if you're just going to patch it with a piece of wood, you can probably figure $50 or so for a handyman to come and do it. To replace the whole door frame, at that point, you're going to replace the door as well because they come as a unit, and they start a plain door with no windows, no decoration on it at all is about $175 for the door and door frame itself.
I was going to say a couple $100.
Plus labor.
Okay.
So probably $350 up to $500 if you put one in that's got a window in it.
And so in the ground fault wires, you see those a lot with little red test trip button on them.
Right. Well, the outlets themselves are only about $15, but if you're not handy or you're uncomfortable with electric, and you probably shouldn't do it yourself either way.
We recommend some of those things like plumbing, electrical. You hire the right person. Get
an electrician to do it. I would have to guess that you're going to be at $100 for the first one, and probably $35 or $40 for each additional one.
So it's a $15 part. It's $100 or so, maybe a little more to have a pro do it for each one.
But it's there to save your life, so it's worth the investment.
Now, how does someone test that if they've never figured out how to do this?
Well, they have a test button built right in. On the red and black one, one manufacturer has red and black buttons, but the newer ones, the buttons are the same color as the outlet itself, but one is marked test. When you push on that, the other one should pop out and it should shut off, meaning if you plug something into it, it should be dead.
So if it doesn't shut off, you know it's defective.
Right. The most common thing is that they don't shut off at all. You push the test button and the other one doesn't even pop out. There are some of the ones with the red and black buttons, though. When you push the button, it pops and the other button pops off, but it doesn't turn off. So you would actually have to plug something in it. And they make testers, which are now down to about $8 or $9. You could buy at any of the home stores that you plug into any outlet on that circuit and push the button on the tester, and it'll trip if it's working, it'll trip the ground fault device.
And the third thing, what did we say we saw? The third thing?
The wires under the kitchen sink.
Oh, yes, the garage garbage disposal.
I mean, if you're going to leave the wires there, they need to terminate in a junction box with a cover on it so that the wire nuts or the electrical tape can't get knocked off of there by something pushed under the sink. And that's an inexpensive thing. That's a $3 or $4 thing.
But it's the whole electric mixed with water that makes it dangerous.
Exactly. Right.
You're listening to Tampa Home Talk, and we're going to take a really quick break. When we come back in just a minute, we're going to finish up with the rest of the part of the other questions we had, like what do you not inspect? How long does it take? And if you find something after the inspection, we'll be back in just a minute.
You're buying a house. Congratulations. So while you're worrying about the paperwork, leave the moving part to us. We're Woody & Sons Moving Company, a Florida licensed and insured mover, and we offer same-day written estimates. Plus, no sneaky mileage, stairs, or additional stop fees. All we ask is that you check out our great ratings on Google and Angie's List, then go to woodyandsons.com to learn more. Whether you need a full-service pack and move or some extra hands, at Woody & Sons Moving Company, we move you.
I have to get a home inspection. Katrina, do you have any idea who I should call?
We have the best. Our show partner actually is David Sivitz with On the Level Inspections. He's got 20 years experience and more than 10,000 inspections.
I am so happy. I had nowhere to go to.
All right, we'll line it up.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Tampa Home Talk. I'm your host, Katrina Madewell. Thanks so much for rejoining us for the last part of our show today. In studio, we have David Sivitz with On the Level. He's our preferred home inspector here at Tampa Home Talk, and we've had a great conversation today around many things. We started off with Chinese Drywall. We've moved into some of the frequently asked questions that you get at a home inspection, and even during and beyond. So, And here's the thing, too. I'd like to let people know, these are not foolproof. I tell every buyer we work with that these are not foolproof. You're human. There's things behind the wall. There's things under the ground that you're not going to be able to see because you can't do damage to the seller's property, for one. And, who's to say they didn't function at the time and stop later? That happens, too. But I know people ask you, what do you inspect?
Okay, well, we try to cover as much as we can. But basically, we're looking at the house structure, the roof structure, heating, cooling, plumbing, electric, the appliances, the bathrooms, particularly the tile in the bathroom, showers and tubs, because if there's water damage behind that can be a very expensive repair. I even check things like the lawn sprinklers and swimming pool, the equipment. I mean, we don't we make sure there are no visible leaks and that everything seems to be safe and running properly. We don't exclude much. Water softeners and water filters are specifically excluded, and again, I don't have X-ray vision. I can't see in the walls under the house or under the slab anyway. And there are certain attics that are just inaccessible. The roof pitch is too low. There isn't enough headroom to crawl through the attic, or it's too dangerous. You're more likely to do damage
And if you're a seller listening and you have an inspector come and make sure you move your stuff so that the inspector can get to the attic and get to the panel box in the garage and that kind of stuff.
Basically, we're only supposed to test things using the normal operating controls, meaning the switches on the wall, the appliances, the controls on the appliances. We're not supposed to open up and look inside of air conditioning systems or electrical panels. However, in older houses that might have aluminum wiring, we often will remove the panel cover to see whether we find the aluminum wiring.
Well, it's the catch-22, right? Required with the 4-point inspections.
Right. They ask the question, but then you're not supposed to do it. So in order to answer the question, you kind of have to stretch it a bit.
That sounds like the whole thing between the banks and the lenders.
Right. Yeah.
And pools, you inspect pools and the pump and that kind of stuff?
Inspect the visible part of the pool. It's very unusual to have a pool leak anywhere that's other than the piping, but I did see one just recently that had 2 vertical cracks right on opposite sides in the middle of the pool. It would have scared me if I were the buyer.
Wow.
So, the proper way to do a test on that is with a dye kit, which we don't carry. It's a long, involved process. Can take almost a week to find out whether it's leaking, but most pools don't leak. They leak at the piping. And the most common problem with a pool is they replace the pool pump motor, and there's an external ground wire that goes to a ground rod, never gets reconnected.
And around the tile too, right? I've seen them leaking there where the tiles
they
can be
leak
rerouted.
around the skimmer often, which is in that tile band. That's where they'll leak.
Gotcha. Now, how long does a typical home inspection take? We were talking earlier about a 2,000 square foot house. Obviously, it depends if it's 1 story or 2, if it has a pool, what extra things you're looking at or not looking at. But on average, how long does an inspection take?
About 2 hours, and then time to review it with the prospective buyer. 2 hours is usually enough. It depends a lot on how many personal possessions are in the way in the house. If it's one of these houses that's just packed, it slows it down.
Which is that catch-22, because the seller thinks it's time to move because they have an offer on their property and it's now a contract. So they may have moving boxes piled high in the garage that are in front of all the things you need to see.
Of course, yeah. Well, but you deal with it every day, and you move what you have to move, or you get the seller to move what they have left in the way.
So when you start adding on extra things, like, for example, the pool and that kind of stuff, how much extra time would you need on a home inspection for those things?
No, the 2 hours will cover most anything, unless it's an extraordinarily old house or an extraordinarily large house.
Yes.
We have in Tampa, we have areas where we have houses that are frame houses built on crawl spaces that are from the 20s and 30s, St. Pete as well. And there's a lot of termite damage, which, although I'm not doing a termite inspection, I have to look for structural damage, and that can take some time because it's like Chinese drywall. You don't want to poke at the one solid beam and say, hey, it looks great, when every other one has got termite damage. So you kind of have to poke at all of them.
And even though you're not doing a termite inspection, you're looking for evidence of termites. So like frass, wings, frass meaning
the
poo.
difference is I'm looking for evidence of termite damage, not live insects. I don't care whether they're, if there's termite damage, the insects can be long gone. If the house may have been treated, may have been tented, there may be no live insects, but that doesn't mean that the damage they did isn't still there.
Right, and it should be repaired. I mean, sometimes these termites eat trusses and crazy stuff.
Do.
Yeah. And those things, obviously can compromise the integrity of and the structure of the house.
Yeah, I saw a house in Spring Hill 2 weeks ago that the entire garage was completely gone. The termites had eaten the wood picture frames. They had come up the wall through the drywall and ate the picture frames from the back. That room is a total loss. It's going to have to come down.
So they ate all the wood behind the drywall?
Well, we didn't remove the drywall, but if they ate all that and they were still hungry, they can't have left much.
Wow.
It happens. It's rare, but it happens.
Did their homeowner's insurance cover that?
The bank is, the bank owns.
Oh boy, that's going to cost somebody some money. So what about those fabulous calls that I'm sure you get sometimes? I found something after the home inspection. Like you said earlier, they're going to call you for a couple things. Hey, you did a great job, and now I'm moving again. Can you re-inspect the house for me? Or, hey, so-and-so's moving. You did a great job on my inspection. Can you help them? Or you get, hey, this is broke, or this wasn't on my inspection.
Well, fortunately, I've done almost 10,000 inspections, and there are certainly people who have called and complained. I try my best to go back and re-inspect and try to identify what the problem was. In many cases, once it's explained to the current owner, they understand that it was not visible or it was not broken at the time of the inspection. I mean, things change after the fact. There's no guarantee that because the air conditioning is working this week that it'll continue to work. But part of the inspection, though, is just to try to identify the age of those kind of components and tell the buyer, look, the air conditioning is 18 years old. The average life is 12 to 15 years. Do I have to write anything more than that, or do you understand that you're on borrowed time? So don't call me 2 weeks from now and complain that it's not working. It's very likely. But
which is a fine line when you start talking about the home inspection to the home warranty, right? Because the home warranties you can get, they cover pre-existing homes that will give you a good, nice, strong warranty after the fact. But it's especially in the first 30 days that somebody files a claim, they're really particular about that stuff. They look at the home inspection to see if it was what they call pre-existing, which that whole thing is debatable, right? If you have an AC that's functioning as intended, but like you said, the average is 12 to 15 years and this thing's 18 years old, it might have another 3 to 5 years, but it might only have a week.
Right. Under the standard real estate contract, I mean, if it's working, that's all it has to be. The roof only has to be watertight. It doesn't have to have 10 years life left. It can, unfortunately, have no life left. But if it's not leaking, it's not an issue under the contract. The home inspection, though, it should identify things like that you are going to have to budget for a roof or an AC. And I often tell people, especially first-time home buyers, talk to your realtor about a home warranty, because that first year, you're not going to have money laying around after a down payment, moving expenses, furniture, or whatever else to pay for a new roof or a new air conditioner.
And here's the thing, too, is talking about the roof, because I just saw this last week for a contract I wrote, and he ended up buying something brand new, but the roof was 20 years old. There was no sign of anything. It was original with the house, so there was no active leaks. Everything looked really nice. The home was maintained well. But the reality of it is, when you do your 4-point inspection and you start talking about the roof in that 4-point inspection, the insurance company is probably not going to insure it.
Right, and that's a fairly new thing. I mean, Citizens Insurance started it about 5 or 6 years ago, but they only wanted roof inspections on houses that were over 25 years old. That didn't make any sense, but that's what they did. But now that there are many more insurance companies writing in Florida, they're all asking for some kind of, we call it a 4-point inspection. It covers heating, cooling, plumbing, electric, and the roof. And it asks the age and the condition of each of those components. They want to know what they're getting into, because they don't want to claim 6 months down the road for a new roof or water damage from a leaky roof. So.
We see crazy stuff, too. I just had a homeowner that bought a bank-owned property, and the homeowner's insurance company kicked it back, saying they didn't want to write a policy on a bank-owned property. So we see just about all of it. You're listening to Tampa Home Talk. You've been in studio today with David Sivitz. Thank you so much for joining us for the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. If at any point you missed any part of the show, it was fantastic. You're going to want to catch it in its entirety. Just hop on over to TampaHomeTalk.com or look for it on a podcast. Just look for Tampa Home Talk. You can search for David Sivitz on the level and get the whole show at your leisure. Thanks for listening today, and we had a great show. Love to see you here same time, same place next week. But for this week, we're out.